I'm going to quickly show you how to tune your snare drum. This is, of course, another drum that we hit a majority of the time. Now, usually what I do is I start with the bottom head. I'll come back to the top head in a second. So I'll just give you an example here. Turn this over. So this is a very fragile drum head. Okay, turn the snare off there and lift that up so you can hear me talk and not hear that rattle. Okay, now it's a very fragile drum head. If I took my key and, punch the drum, this key would go right through the head. It's just that fragile. It's so we can get the snare wires rattling. Now this drum, believe it or not, has a very tight pitched bottom head. Listen to this. That is very normal for a very decent sounding snare bottom. I actually learned that tip from Dave Weckl years ago. I used to have one of his snare drums with the double strainers, and I said, what's the secret to getting that drum sounding good? And he says, how tight is the bottom head? And I said, I don't know, average. He goes, crank it. Okay. Went home and cranked it up, and the drum sounded like $1,000,000. And so I do that with all my snares now. Obviously within reason. You don't want to crank it to a point where you're going to start snapping things. Another very good thing to do, especially with snare drums, is to oil your tension rods from time to time. WD-40, any kind of lube, lug lube. LP makes lug lube. Gibraltar makes some type of tension rod lube. Definitely do that a lot because it just preserve the life of your drum and making your tuning so much easier as well. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm just going to take my key, lightly tap. I'm going to hold the strainer wires up here just so I can hear the pitch. Otherwise, if I leave them down and I tap it, this is what it's going to sound like. So I need to get them up there. Sounds like this. So at the very end there, I could hear a pitch difference. So what I want to do is I want to make sure they're all the same. You notice how that second one's a little bit lower. Simply just turn the key just a little bit. Make sure you own a drum key. I got them sounding exactly the same. So that's a big one. You want to go around the whole snare and make sure they all sound the same, and make sure that head has a pretty good pitch to it. You can even go tighter, but sometimes I've found that going too tight can start to choke the drum a little bit. So make sure you're not too tight, but definitely not too loose. So then I turn the drum over, and I'll put it on the stand, and I will take a look at the top head. Now, this is where, once again, it really becomes personal. If I'm playing, I have a recording custom snare that's really deep. It's like 7 inches deep. If I want to use that for some big, fat, old classic rock sounds, I tend to loosen the head a little bit so I can really get a thick, fat sound. On my piccolo snares, which are the shorter depth snares, if I want a lot of really loud, snappy crack for funk music or something like that, I crank them up a little more. With the drums that are like a 5-inch or 5.5-inch, I try to sort of meet halfway between really, really tight and really, really loose. That's just a personal preference, and your ears will tell you when you're going to be happy. So the head that I'm using here is the Evans Power Center, which is actually a 1-ply head, but it's got this built-in like a target type of thing on it, which gives it a little bit more beef and also preserves the life. So the single-ply head is going to give you a little bit more life than a 2-ply head. Experiment with the two of those. For example, a G2 would be a 2-ply head, a G1 would be a 1-ply head. So you can experiment with those and see which one works for you and your style of music. So I'm going to just tap around the drum and listen to the pitch. Now I've been playing on this one for some of the play-alongs we did, so it might have gone a little bit out of tune. Let's take a listen. So by listening to that, I could see there are some differences, and that just comes from playing. I mean, there's a couple of songs we played I was hitting pretty hard, and that's what happens. That's, just like playing a guitar. Guitars go out of tune all the time. Pianos eventually go out of tune. Same thing with drums. So just a quick check here, and I'm going to tap around and try to fix this really quickly. So what I do next, once everything is in tune with one another, is I'll turn the snares on and I'll give the drum a good smack. And that's where the personal preference comes in, is you have to decide, do you like that? Now, if my throw off or my strainer is loose, there's a little knob that we have on here that you can turn counterclockwise and clockwise. Most snare drums have one. I'm going to just hit the drum and I'm going to loosen this thing off. Now it doesn't change, my tuning's not being changed, just what I'm doing on the strainer is going to loosen my snare wire. So take a listen to this. So all of a sudden, my great sounding snare now sounds not so great. Now this might be a problem you have. Maybe your heads are in perfect tune and you hit the drum and it goes boom. Well, you might be surprised. You can start hitting the drum. I'm going to turn the strainer knob up to try to bring the snare wires back up in contact with the bottom head. Something like this. At that point, you'll find your happy place for your snare drum. Now, the other thing that happens, especially with very thin types of drum heads, single ply and types of heads like that, is you might get all kinds of nasty overtones. You hit the drum and it goes, and maybe the head's in tune or close to in tune, is you need some sort of muffling. And simply, I'm using these tone tabs. You can use things like tone tabs or moon gel, tape, all kinds of options. And simply what this little piece of sticky glue will do when I put it to the drum, let me hit it for you without the tone tab and then I'll put it on and you can hear the difference. So you can really hear a difference, at least I hope you can, because I sure can from behind the drum. That simple little piece of tone tab really takes away all those excess rings and obnoxieties that we don't really want to deal with when we hit the snare. So that's another way to take a look at how to tune the snare drum. So experiment with that and have fun.